Up until now, the extent of the involvement of military soldiers in the actual dispersal process is not clear. We saw military equipment such as bulldozers around the country, but in terms of the actual dispersal, the tear gas that's being fired, that was carried out by the police, not by the army. So that's an important distinction to be made. It will be announced surely in the coming few days what the extent of the involvement of the army was. Overall, the security forces, though, have been showing no inclination to allow the protesters to take the protests in other parts of the city, and that's why we've been seeing tear gas being fired in other parts of the city, such as the Mohandisin neighborhood in southern Cairo. So clearly following on that government order to show no tolerance for any more gatherings by supporters of the deposed president. Jane?
According to Reuters, the security forces have arrested a senior Brotherhood politician, Mohammed El-Beltaghi. They did say that they would arrest those who were involved in violence, that those who weren't involved in violence were given an exit from the square, though correspondents on the ground tell us that they didn't see those. What about the Muslim Brotherhood members who have been arrested and who will be arrested? What is their future now?
Well, we have been seeing the senior leadership of the Brotherhood, those who have been in custody over the past few weeks being prosecuted. A very important trial to keep an eye on, of course, is going to be taking place later this month, a trial featuring or at least the Supreme Guide of the Muslim Brotherhood is being put on trial in absentia because he's still not in custody, but the deputy leader of the Muslim Brotherhood is in custody. He will be facing a trial, as well as other important figures from that group. But remember, the Rabaa sit-in that the police are trying to disperse now with the ongoing operation, that remained the headquarters, if you will, of the other leaders who were either still being sought by the police or are not particularly sought but have been huddled in that gathering. It's not clear to us up until now if any of the senior leadership inside the sit-in had been arrested, but do expect authorities to be after certain figures, particularly such as the hardline cleric Safwat al-Hijazi, such as Mohammed El-Beltaghi, whose name you mentioned, because the police there had been arrest warrants issued against them on accusations of inciting violence. In terms of those who had cleared the squares, the police says that the peaceful protesters who were not armed will not be sought after, but we have seen arrests of people the police say were armed and dangerous. Jane?
What about the emergency cabinet meeting that occurred in the last hour or so? Give us some lines from that, please.
We clearly saw the leadership of the interim government on alert since the early hours of the morning. The Defense Minister Abdel Fattah al-Sisi overseeing operations in a Defense Ministry operation room. Separately, the Interior Ministry also, who we understand spent the night in his office to oversee the operation, has been taking part in the direct supervision of what's going on. Separately, Prime Minister Hazem al-Biblawi, who had been in the office since the early hours of the morning, held a meeting for a so-called crisis group. After that meeting, a statement was issued, and it became clear to us that the civilians in the leadership are backing the actions of the men in uniform. The statement clearly lauded the performance of security forces, thanked them for what was described as restraint in dealing with the protesters, and issued a very clear warning that there will be no tolerance for any armed action or armed escalation. Jane?
All right, Raya, let's bring in Bernard Smith, who's at a mosque near the Giza district of Cairo. Bernard, when I spoke to you in the last 15 minutes or so, you were hiding out in a coffee shop. It had all turned particularly violent. What's the situation now?
Well, we're still hearing sporadic gunfire. We've had to leave the coffee shop where we were and drive away from there, but we're now overlooking a main arterial road in Cairo that's been completely closed off, sealed off. There's no traffic on it, and this heads towards the mosque where the pro-Morsi supporters had headed earlier this morning. Occasionally, we still hear that gunfire, and as we spoke earlier, what we seem to have is this fighting between both armed groups, both pro-Morsi and anti-Morsi. Both sides seem to have weapons from somewhere. They're being used, and you're hearing gunfire echoing through these suburban streets, Jane.
Is there some kind of leadership that you are aware of? People who are directing pro and anti-Morsi supporters on what to do in this instance?
No, to be honest, we're not. It's very difficult for us to assess how this has been, how this is being led, if it's being led. Clearly, there was always a fear that when the authorities moved to clear those two sit-in camps, that the pro-Morsi Muslim Brotherhood supporters would try and congregate elsewhere. That they have tried to do at this mosque here. The local residents, of course, don't want them here, and it seems to be the local residents that have taken the situation into their own hands. I'm looking down now on this main road, and I can see about 3 or 4 ambulances that have arrived, and they have parked up well away from the mosque, certainly, but I can also see black smoke rising behind one building. But yeah, there's certainly, half a dozen, 6 ambulances there now down this road, clearly prepared for casualties, Jane.
Bernard, from what you've witnessed and what you are still seeing, and it really shows the hatred on the streets, the incredibly deep divisions in Egypt at the moment.
It does. I mean, before the event of this morning, you couldn't go out onto the streets. There were no neutral opinions on the streets of Cairo. You were either for Morsi or against Morsi, and there's certainly that hatred mixed with weapons, with guns, is clearly a very dangerous cocktail here. And pro-anti-Morsi supporters, clearly those ones that are around the mosque where we were before, they don't want them there, and they're essentially taking their law into their own hands while the police watch on and don't interfere.
Okay,
and there's some more gunfire just as I speak to you.
I'm just, as we're talking to you, Bernard, I'm looking at a live picture coming from Giza, from Nada Square, which was cleared effectively this morning. And we saw sort of a mini running battle there with the security forces chasing after what could be Muslim Brotherhood supporters, it could be residents there chasing them. One of the security forces put his arm around one of the demonstrators' necks and was chasing him away. So obviously a very, very volatile and the potential for more violence, it's there, isn't it, Bernard? We're watching it spread so rapidly throughout the country as people are hearing what's going on.
Well, I think what seems to be the case is this, that pro-Morsi supporters, and they've been saying this all along, have been determined to maintain their protest. And they are seeking opportunities to protest elsewhere. It looks like the authorities have taken a decision that the only way to stop them gathering elsewhere, certainly from what we have seen, is to strike with a heavy hand. Otherwise, they're going to be able to establish protest camps again. And so this is what is seen to be happening. And the authorities have got, in the areas where the Brotherhood, Muslim Brotherhood and pro-Morsi supporters try to congregate again, they have the backing, often it seems, of the local residents as well.
All right, Bernard, let's leave it there and talk about Egypt's interim leaders. They haven't said much about the day's events. Spokesman for the cabinet did make this statement just a little earlier.
We hold them responsible for the bloodshed and riots. The government praises the security forces for their efforts in breaking up the protests and sit-ins in Rabaa al-Adawiya and Nada Square. And we praise the commitment and their strong self-constraint and professionalism during the clear-out, which is reflected in the low number of casualties. This, in comparison with the high number of protesters and the range of weapons used against the security forces. The government affirms that it will confront any attempts by some groups to sabotage public facilities and government institutions which belong to the people. The government affirms that it is moving forward with the roadmap.
It is 11:30 GMT, that's 13:30 in Cairo. Let's take you through some of the main developments in Egypt. Security forces have moved to clear 2 sit-ins in Cairo in support of deposed President Mohamed Morsi. The smaller of the 2 camps in Nada Square was completely cleared. There is some scuffles taking place on the outskirts of that square. Soldiers and police are advancing on the larger protest.